Uli. Hello, if I haven't met you before, welcome. Nice to see you here at our church. Here in Genesis chapter 22, God tests Abraham and demands, I would say, too much from him. What do you think? Is it too much what he demands? And I want to suggest that God demands of you so much, maybe too much, he will demand of you. He does. So look here at Genesis chapter 22. It says in 22 that sometime later, God tested Abraham. He said to him, Abraham. That's how the demand of God starts. He calls you by name. And listen to the answer. Here I am. Abraham will say that 3 times through this passage. The NIV translates it differently later on once, but he says it 3 times. Here I am. He's available. Wonder what you think about the idea of God testing Abraham and, dare I say, you? I don't like the idea. I balk at the idea of God testing Abraham because I have children who test each other. What they do is they wait until their sibling is at the worst possible level of tiredness and kind of just finished for the day, and then they test them because they know that this other sibling is going to fail, and so now is the time to test. They provoke, and they get exactly what they want, which is the brother or sister fails the test. Don't be smiling. It's not him. It's obviously else. Rosie's looking at me too. It's not her either. And Junie's not in the room, so we'll blame her. No. We've all done it, and I've done it with my brothers. Haven't we? We've done it. You test them because you know that they're going to fail. That is not what God is doing. You could equally translate this word prove. Test is okay, but it's not the kind of test where you test because you know that they're going to fail. He's testing to show, to prove what is here. And as Martin said last week, faith is not particularly about what's inside of you. Faith is your little kind of attachment to the thing that is outside of you, God. Point being, God is going to test Abraham's faith, but we're also going to see God proven at the same time. You know how you test a four-wheel drive? If you want to advertise a four-wheel drive, what you do is you do not put it in the showroom, leaving it shiny and take photos and videos of it in the showroom. You thrash it on the ads, don't you? It's some rock music in the background. You thrash it up a mountain on a rocky road, and you put it through a bunch of puddles, because you're saying, we know this is going to go. You should see how hard this thing can go. Let me test it, road test it for you in front of your eyes, and you'll see this is strong. You'll see what's under the hood. And we're going to see what's under the hood of Abraham here and of his God. He said to him, Abraham, here I am, he replied. Then God said, take your son. And I want you to think about Abraham's son, Isaac. Not just who he is, but what he is. Because Isaac is the culmination of the last 10 chapters. Because Abraham was 75 years old. Think about, I'm sorry if you're 75, but think about how old that is. And that's when God started his story in Genesis chapter 12. Saying, I know that you haven't got kids, and I know that you're 75, and I know that your wife's 65 and has been barren her whole life. But I'm going to start a new thing in you. Because 75 is not actually that old for God. I'm going to start a new thing. And he says, he promises, remember, I'm going to give you a child. And that child will be a blessing to all nations. That child will turn into a nation. Your old barren family will turn into a whole nation of people. But not only have you got this great nation that's going to be your descendants, but this nation will bless all of the nations of the world, even in Australia. And God, so that's why I'm saying, think about not just who this is, but what this son is. He's the culmination of God's promise, and he's the start of God's plan to bless and redeem the entire world. And God says, take your son. And I want you to listen to the demand of God on Abraham's life. And it's like walking down steps into further and further despair. Listen to the demand of God on Abraham's life. Take your son, your only son, Isaac, with your laughter. That's what Isaac means, doesn't it? Take your laughter. Isaac, whom you love. This is the first time the word love is used in the Bible. And it's right there in the call for sacrifice from God on Abraham's life. And go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there. The steps keep going down there. As a burnt offering. On one of the mountains that I'll tell you about. Down and down and down into the deepest, darkest demand that God put on Abraham's life. And I have a friend, had a friend who's passed away now, Tim, at the first church that I worked at Ashfield, and he couldn't go past this. We read it together and he said, that's too much. No. And he wouldn't go past it. And you may be sitting there as a Christian or a non-Christian thinking that's too much. I can't go on from there. Too much in so many ways for Abraham. It's his son, the one he loves. It's the culmination of the promise. And God says to sacrifice him. And darkness upon darkness here, child sacrifice is abhorrent. Just to my ethical standards, cares about them particularly, but also to God's. We'll find out in the rest of the Old Testament that he says, you must never, ever sacrifice children like they do to the other gods. And so there's this strangeness to the call, as well as the painfulness of it in the first place. And I wonder if you think that it's too much. And God will demand your life like this, because this son is Abraham's future. He's given up his past in Genesis chapter 12, when God said to him, leave your family and everything and go to the place I'll tell you. Similar, actually. He doesn't tell him where, he says, to the place I'll tell you. So he's left his past, but he's now calling him to leave his future inheritance of kind of honor and place in the world, and name for himself, and even just someone to look after him in his old age. God is calling him to leave his just all his dreams and hopes for what he had in the future, even the hopes that he thought God had given to him. He says, give them back now. And God will call that from you. God does call that from you. Because God is the living God. He's the creator, and you are his creatures that he made on purpose for his purposes. He does not exist for your sake and to bless you and give you a good life. You exist for his. He is the creator, and he demands your life. In Luke chapter 12, Jesus is telling a story, and he basically describes the Australian lifestyle, which is so great in so many ways, but he judges it here. And he says to a man who's just enjoying his life, not hurting anybody else, just enjoying his life and eating and just taking life easy, it says. And it says in verse 20 of Luke chapter 12, but God said to him, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded of you. Jesus teaches, and the Bible teaches, that God demands your life and says, lay it down for me. In this story in Luke chapter 12, it's at the end of his life because he's going to have to lay it in front of God to be judged. But actually, every day should be laid in front of God, and that's what's found wanting. He wasn't rich towards God, it says, because God deserves our life. There's this general sense that I'm trying to point out here that God is creator, and so he demands our life. But then secondly, there's a particular sense in which Jesus says, follow me, like literally in my footsteps, and listen to my words and do what I say. And so God demands your life to follow the Lord Jesus. And I'm tempted to pull out some examples of the commands that he has and say, so are you doing this? But I won't actually, because it's broader than that. He says, follow me, and then you listen. And whatever he says and wherever he leads you, he demands your life. But then there's more ways that he'll demand your life. Sometimes he will take good things from in your life. Maybe he'll let health be taken. In Job chapter 1, God allows the health and the family and the wealth of Job to be taken. He allows that to happen because all things are under his command. And that may happen to you. that God will allow suffering into your life, that God will allow good things not to happen for you that you have got your heart on. God demands our lives because he is God. Job says at the end of that chapter, the Lord gives and the Lord takes away. May the name of the Lord be praised. And God demands that even if he takes away your best or your future or your dreams, that you praise his name and you trust that he is good and that he's for you. In these many, many ways, in the big decisions of life and the big kind of turning points of life, but also just in the daily, he demands our life, just as he has for Abraham here. And I wonder if, like Tim, you can go further or not. And I invite you to, though, to just wait. Just sit with this story. Listen to what happens. Verse 3, early the next morning, Abraham got up and saddled his donkey. He took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac. When he had cut enough wood for the burnt offering, he set out for the place that God had told him about. On the 3rd day, God looked up and saw the place in the distance. He said to his servants, "Stay here with the donkey while I go with the boy over there. We will worship and we will come back to you." And there's so much to mark in this story, so much to mark. Mark verse 5 and notice Abraham says, "We will come back. We will go and worship and we will come back." And it could be that he's just telling a white lie because Isaac's there and he doesn't want to raise suspicion about what's really going on here. But that's not the case, actually. Because Hebrews in the New Testament tells us, this was a moment of faith where Abraham trusted that this is the God of life. And this is the God who will do what he says he will do. And just in chapter 17, he's reaffirmed the promise and said, no, it won't be through other half-children or other ideas that you have, Abraham. God has said, it will be through this child, Isaac. And so Abraham trusted and said, no, wait, we will come back. He doesn't deny God's demand, but he trusts God in God's demand. Trusts God's goodness in God's demand. What is God demanding from you at the moment? What is he withholding? What is he not letting happen? Can you have the faith of Abraham and trust God's goodness that you will come back from this? Well, look on verse 6. Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and placed it on his son Isaac. And he himself carried the fire and the knife. It turns out that Isaac is old enough to carry the wood. He must be a little bit strong and probably not, he's not a toddler. And also he will ask a pretty good question, pretty deceptive question. But young kids do that. But it seems that Isaac is not a small boy. And one commentator that I was reading, James Montgomery Boyce, pretty respected American commentator, does the maths with what you get in the preceding and preceding chapters of when was Isaac weaned and when does Sarah die, and there's some maths he does, and he reckons he was in his early 30s. Some say a little younger. And in verse 7 it says, Isaac spoke up and said to his father, Abraham, "Father." And Abraham replied, "Here I am." Again, it says, "Yes, my son," but he actually says in Hebrew. I checked with my friend because I can't do Hebrew anymore after only 1 year. "Here I am." And Isaac asks his perceptive question. "Behold," the Hebrew says. "Look, the fire. And behold, the wood. Look, there's wood, Dad. But where's the lamb for the burnt offering?" And Abraham answered again with faith, not with white lies, but with faith in what God had told him. Faith in what God had told him, but he can't yet see. God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son. And the two of them went on together. Again, I ask, what is God demanding of you? Big decisions, big turning points, to turn away from certain sins, to allow him to let suffering into your life, and yet you praise him. And can you trust him like faith, like Abraham, and say, my God will provide for me. He's bringing me abundant life. This decision feels like death, and my friends are saying it's a dead end for me. But God says he's got life. What Abraham says. And then we come to the place. When they reached the place that God had told him about, Abraham built an altar there and arranged the wood on it. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then he reached out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord called out to him from heaven, "Abraham, Abraham, here I am," he replied. Love how available to God and to other, even to other people, Abraham is through the story. "Here I am. Do not lay a hand on the boy," he said. "Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God because you have not withheld from me your only son." Abraham looked up, and there in a thicket he saw a ram caught by its horns. He went over and took the lamb and sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called that place, "The Lord will provide." It's almost just as Abraham said. There's no lamb, but a ram, and it's close enough, isn't it? And there is no death of Isaac. It's so beautiful. And I don't know, I have so much trouble with the fact that God demanded child sacrifice, but then later he says it's abhorrent and we must never, ever go anywhere near that. But what I do see here is that this doesn't end in child sacrifice. And that God could be trusted, even though I can't understand why he asked. And a ram is slain in Isaac's place. It actually reminds me the strangeness of it that God says this will happen and make a burnt offering of his son, and it doesn't happen. It reminds me of Genesis chapter 3, where God says, if you sin, it will lead to death. You'll die. You'll surely die if you sin. But by the end of the chapter, they have sinned and they haven't died. But God makes coverings for them out of animals, leather, out of animal skin, because to hide their nakedness. And it would seem that they didn't die, but some animals died, kind of to cover their shame. And there seems to be something similar happening here, where God provides a sacrifice for them. And I think what we see here in Genesis chapter 22 is one of the most profound lessons of the Bible on what worship is. Because in verse 5, Abraham used the word worship, and again, that's the first time in the Bible that the word worship is used. Interesting. I suppose if you get early enough in the Bible, everything's going to be the first word. But we're 22 chapters in, and it hasn't used worship until now. It hasn't used love until now. And this is a lesson. This is a paradigm of worship. One of the most important things to say about worship is that you know God as God and you lay down your life that he demands of you. You let him have your future and your passions. You say, take any of it, take all of it. It's yours anyway. And worship is also where you recognize that he will send you back down the mountain with abundance and with life and with a new future and a new passion. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who lost his life because of where his faith led him. Dietrich Bonhoeffer said of this passage, Abraham comes back down the mountain looking with, if you look with your eyes, everything's the same. He just comes back down the mountain with his son. But at the same time, everything has changed because he has given his son to God. But then he has received him back, mediated now through Christ, is what Bonhoeffer says. Abraham has received his life and his future and his passion and the thing he loves most back, but not the same. He receives it in a new way. He receives it mediated through Christ. And as I say, God demands your life from you and will daily and big points and turning points demand things from you. And some of them he will give them back to you. And you'll look the same and you will do the same thing that you were going to. But you'll have received it through him in a new way, offered to him as a sacrifice and then given to you as owned by him now. And other times he'll take from you, let things be taken from you, and you won't get them back the same, but you will be provided for. He'll send you out with joy. Chris here at the back gave me a note this week with a beautiful psalm, which is a psalm of ascent, Psalm number 26, which means a psalm you sing on the way up the mountain to Jerusalem. And it's so beautiful. It says, you sing this on the way up to Jerusalem, you who sow in tears will reap joy. You who sow with, as you go up to Jerusalem, you sing this, you who sow with tears will reap with joy. And God demands your life. And there'll be tears, but you will reap joy if you sow your life and your death to God. Now, this is not the end of the story of this mountain that he's been shown, and this crazy, terrible moment, crisis has happened. Beautiful as well. This is not the end of the story of this spot in the Bible, because in 2 Samuel chapter 24, King David, one of Isaac's descendants, because Isaac stayed alive and had children and turned into a great nation, and King David buys the plot of land on which this stuff took place. At that point, it's a threshing floor belonging to a guy called Aruna, who knew? That's what 2 Samuel 24 says. And then his son, Solomon, takes the threshing floor of Aruna that his dad bought for a certain amount of silver, and builds something there. Do you know what he builds there? He builds the temple of the Lord. The places where many, many lambs and rams will be sacrificed. And that mountain becomes Jerusalem. That is the spot where Jerusalem will be settled upon and where Jesus will be tried and killed, just outside the city walls. You see, Isaac asked a very good question. And as I say, I checked with my friend on the Hebrew this week because I remembered a few things from a few years ago that I heard. I wanted to check them. And when Isaac says, look, we've got the wood and the wood and the fire, but where's the land? There's this particle in front of those words. Behold, he says, look, Dad, behold, there's wood, and look, Dad, behold, there's what's the other one? Fire. And John the Baptist, just outside of Jerusalem in Bethany, sees Jesus coming towards him for the first time, and he answers Isaac's question, because the ram wasn't the answer mostly to Isaac's question. Jesus was. John the Baptist looks at Jesus, sees him coming, and says, behold, the Lamb of God, which takes away the sin of the world. Jesus is God's answer to his demand. He demands your life from you, but he gives you life. He gives you his very self in Jesus. In Jesus, God will provide everything you could need, and he will provide more than you could dream of for yourself. And on the last day, and maybe beforehand, but definitely on the last day, and I hope beforehand for me and you, we'll be able to say, thank you so much that you demanded those other things and that you gave me the things that were in Jesus instead. It is so hard to trust that we don't need the things taken from us at the moment, or the sin that he's calling away from. Isn't it true that some sin seems naughty and bad and dirty and whatever, but other sin just seems like, actually, I think that would be pretty fulfilling. I think that feels like it would be life for me, and that would be a future for me. But it's not. And God calls you to trust him. And on the last day, you, and maybe before, you will see that the answer that he has for you in Jesus is better and richer. Better for you and richer for us, and richer for you, but better for the people around you as well. And so, I want you to think about what God is demanding from you. And I want you to know that he has provision for you in his demand. Are you someone who's been thinking about becoming a Christian maybe for a long time and you feel a bit on the fence? It is your choice. And yet also God demands that you follow him and you give up and you just start following Jesus. And I want you to hear that tonight, that he demands that you follow him. I want you to hear that he's the God who provides life as well, and provision, and he'll send you back down the mountain with more. Are you someone who is, as I said a few times, maybe sorely tempted at the moment by particular sin decisions that aren't the way of God for your life. Patterns or jobs or people, relationships. I want you to hear that God demands that you follow him. But in the following of him that might feel like death today, you'll find life. Are you someone that God is letting suffer? The Lord's taken away for you. Would you see he's the God that will give you life and that he is for your good? And will you praise him even in it? Another few observations as we bring things to a close. I think that sometimes after following Jesus for a long time, after giving your life to him, sometimes we can get a bit lopsided one way or the other. We can see God as just the God who demands, or we can kind of refer to God as just the God who loves me and provides for me. And I want to call us back to the balance of knowing him as the God he truly is, which is both at once. Are you someone who just notices the love and the provision of God? This I'm pretty optimistic and positive. I tend to focus on that God just really loves me and he got my good. And so sometimes it can feel a bit shocking when I read the demands of him. But I need to have the both. I want to suggest that if you're someone who's lopsided, like I can be on the provision of God all the time, I'm going to bring this right down to practicalities. I want to suggest that it can be easy to not be very regular at church, because church just becomes this thing that's kind of encouraging for you, and I'll go learn some stuff and see the people I really like, rather than what it actually is, first of all, which is for God. He deserves your worship. It's the time that we come together to lay down our life at the start of the week and to get into the pattern of laying down our life, which is sitting under his word and praying to him and blessing people that I wouldn't normally hang out with or wouldn't have chosen to hang out with necessarily. Church is for God first of all, and for you second. And we've got it. I was just trying to think of some of the ways that it would look if we didn't know the demand of God. But equally, some of us get a bit lopsided and just know the demand of God and forget the provision of God and the love of God. And it all feels like hard work, and we feel like he's forgotten us. And we find it hard not to turn up to church, and we hope nobody notices when we're away because it's our record. And it might be a good reason to miss church. I've heard that there's a few, I'm not sure what they are, but I've heard that there's a few. No, there are sometimes, right? But isn't that interesting? If you know God is the God who demands, then you'll find it hard to, even if there's a good reason to miss church. And the trick is not to kind of just focus on the opposite one, because you find the opposite one in the other half. The only way that you can submit to God in his demands is to know him fully as the God who's going to provide for you and does provide for you. And the only way that you can kind of really sit under his provision is to know that who he really is, that he's God and he demands life from you. You've got to find the one in the other. The other thing I want to say, to hopefully get it practical for you, is in what way does God provide for you when he calls your life? Big ways, little ways, big decisions, day-to-day decisions. First of all, it's important to know that God provides for you life in Jesus in eternity. And what we believe is that God is going to wipe suffering out from our universe, for our existence. Revelation 21 says he'll wipe every tear and take away suffering, and he will set things to right. There will be proper justice. And that's what we focus on. But he also provides for us along the way. I find it so interesting how at the start of Genesis chapter 22, God says, go to the place that I'll show you. He doesn't even tell him where he's going. But twice in the middle of the story, it says that God has shown him where to go, which means that he's provided for him along the way. He's shown him along the way that, okay, this is where we're going to go. And that's what God will do for you along, not just at the end. It's not just that we kind of like shrug everything off until the end, but also he'll provide for you day by day, just what you need. I remember one of the most difficult few weeks of my life a few years ago. And I told God, you have taken too much from me. It's too much. And I put his things aside and I decided to work things out for myself. And I called a friend to get them to help me on what God had obviously forgotten about with me. And I called my friend, I hadn't seen him for 2 years. And I said, look, I know I haven't seen you and I don't even know you that well, but I need your help. And I told them what it was. They said, actually, Blake, I haven't seen you for 2 years. And you're right, I do live an hour and a half away, so it's going to be really difficult to do that every fortnight. To do that for a while. But do you know something strange? God put you on my heart just a few days ago. I've been thinking and praying for you. I was in the darkest place thinking that God had forgotten me. And while I was doing that and praying grumpy things, I don't know if that's praying. I know it is praying, the Psalms pray grumpy things. God was arranging things with the particular person that I needed. He put me on their heart to provide for you day by day. I remember sometimes for Sarah and I in our hardest times, I remember making a cup of tea before the kids got up and reading our Bible. And we were just in, the darkest place. And we opened up to today's reading. And it was a psalm. And we were so sad and so much despair. And yet we laughed together. Because God was speaking exactly what we needed. And we laughed and we said, oh, I guess this one's not a reading for us. Because it was exactly for us. Because God knew what to say to us that morning. He'll provide for you at the end. And He'll provide on the way. Trust Him. Okay, that is long enough. Let me finish by sharing with you Mark chapter 8. Chapter 8, verse 34. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, I mentioned before, lost his life for Jesus in perhaps one of the coolest ways, which is trying to kill God. His faith led him to try and, I think it's kind of cool, to try and assassinate Hitler, and then he got hung for that because he got caught. But Dietrich Bonhoeffer, reflecting on Mark chapter 8, puts it really succinctly. So I'm going to give you Dietrich Bonhoeffer's and then I'll give you Jesus' long version. Dietrich Bonhoeffer says, when Christ calls a person, He bids them come and die. And he was referring to Mark chapter 8, verse 34, which says, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it. But whoever loses their life for me and for the gospel will save it. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world and yet forfeit their soul? Or what can anyone give in exchange for their soul? If anyone is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will be ashamed of them when He comes in His Father's glory with holy angels. When Christ calls a person, He bids them come die